In today's video, we have a lot to cover, including the latest around the Toronto Maple Leafs. We've talked plenty about a potential trade involving Mitch Marner, but what about Captain John Tavares? How likely is that, and how are the conversations potentially going to go? Plus, who's the next likely head coach of the Maple Leafs? We'll discuss all the latest around the Toronto Maple Leafs in that sense. Plus, the Leafs are actually one of a few teams interested in a fairly high-profile KHL free agent. Plus, we have news on the NHL Awards ceremonies coming up. We actually got an unexpected little press conference from GM of the Bruins, Don Sweeney, with some very interesting comments based on how things have gone in that Bruins-Panthers series. We also have some other news around the NHL, including the Buffalo Sabres coaching staff, other coaching updates and rumors around the league, and the latest around the Stanley Cup playoffs. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to cover today. Let's dive in and get started first with the latest around the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs. It was a very interesting night of games last night, featuring the Panthers against the Bruins and Game 3 of the Oilers against the Canucks. The Panthers-Bruins game was interesting. The Bruins came out firing hard early on, laying some big hits, got a bit of a lead. It certainly looked like things were going in the right direction. 2-0 Boston. Florida does eventually battle back and ended up getting the tying goal around Sam Bennett, who was enemy number one now in Boston after injuring Brad Marchand. Before the game last night, we got another angle, another view from a camera that was on the other side of the ice that showed the Bennett-Marchand hit, where Bennett does indeed sucker punch Marchand. And Marchand's been out. They're calling it day to day. They're not really saying a lot about the injury, but it's believed to be concussion symptoms. So certainly he's taken out the Bruins captain, which is a major loss for them, obviously, and nothing from NHL player safety. Now, there was word as well that player safety didn't even have that camera angle either, which I found very weird. Not sure why they didn't have that one, or why they weren't looking for it. It's just really confusing. After what Bennett did to Marchand, in my opinion, he shouldn't even have been playing that game, let alone, of course, it's always the way it works out in sports. The storyline follows him to be the big hero for Florida, getting the game-tying goal. Barkov scored the winner, which was, he went right through the entire Bruins D himself. That was just an unacceptable goal. I'm not saying the Bruins lost because of the Bennett goal, or strictly just because of one play, but certainly, it might have had a different outcome, because the Bennett goal, not only was it controversial because he was even in the lineup and no supplementary discipline, but it was also a goaltender interference review that ended up going the way of the Panthers. Before shooting the puck into the almost empty cage, Bennett shoves Charlie Coyle into Jeremy Swayman and then scores the goal, and they don't call it goalie interference. I'm shocked that it wasn't goalie interference, to be completely honest. If you look at the definition of the rule, it's exactly what it says. Now, I guess their interpretation was that it wouldn't have made a difference for Swayman to make the save, but in my opinion, those need to be a little bit more black and white. I don't really like leaving things up to interpretation that way, to whoever's looking at it. It's just really bizarre how we've seen that there was one goal called back that was a no-goal call after a lengthy review in the Florida-Tampa series, where the Tampa player got turned around and barely even bumped Bobrovsky, and that was no goal. I don't know, it's so weird. It turned out to be a controversial play from a controversial player, and it ends up making the difference in the game. So the Panthers go up 3-1 on the Bruins, and the Bruins are certainly going to be out trying to survive now. In the next one, we did get a impromptu press conference, you could say, media availability from General Manager Don Sweeney today, which was not expected. You don't usually see GM speaking to the media until the season is over, but he had some interesting comments. He made it clear from the beginning of things that he wasn't there to criticize the officials, because he said they're going to get fined. They don't want to do that. But he said that essentially the media shouldn't be asking the coach about the coach's challenge and about the officiating, because they're kind of setting them up to be fined and for even talking about it or being critical. I don't agree with that part of what he said. I think that's part of what they had to do their job. and certainly have to, that's a critical part of the game. They have to ask about it. What's the thought process about the challenge and all that? But what he did say that I did agree with is he said that essentially the ones making these decisions should have to speak to the media and explain themselves. So essentially calling for the NHL to make the referees, the officials, or the supervisor officials available to speak and explain how those calls were determined. To be honest, I think it would also be a good idea when the referees come back from reviews and they say, goal, no goal, add a little more context. Explain why. They don't usually ever say that. All they come back and say is the call is either confirmed or the call is changed, and they don't generally give you anything further. So when you're the one that's having it go against you, it can be quite frustrating and difficult to understand. I've been saying for a long time, I'm all for making officials speak to the media. Why shouldn't they? Why do they always get to be, clear of explaining their decisions? It just, to me, it's something that a lot of people are clamoring for. Sweeney did acknowledge that it's been something that's been discussed in NHL general manager meetings before. Obviously, there wasn't a huge support for it because clearly it's never moved forward, but I do wonder how things will feel now. So essentially, Sweeney went on to say, that he really thinks there should be more accountability on that front, which I don't disagree with. But as far as the media not asking about officiating, I don't think that's going to be possible. But I guess if they knew the referees were going to speak and they could ask those questions to them, they may not ask as many questions around that to the coaches, I guess. We'll see. We also had a very interesting game, Edmonton versus Vancouver, which resulted in the Canucks taking a 2-1 series lead and also resulted in our first suspension of the postseason with Canuck defenseman Carson Soucy facing a 1-game suspension. I did do a dedicated video on that earlier today, so certainly check out the channel if you want a little bit more details. But essentially, scrum behind the net after the game was over, after the whistle. The Canucks ended up winning the game 4-3. Skinner was pulled as well. Another good piece of context there. Pickard goes in for the third. I wonder who's going to start game 4. Skinner has not been good at all and could be the reason why they again lose their opportunity to be a more serious cup contender. But yeah, so McDavid's behind the net. After the whistle's gone, the game is over. He's in a bit of a, verbal altercation, you could say, with Soucy. Soucy shoves him. McDavid does slash him, but it's not a light slash, in my opinion, to the shin pads. Soucy slashes him back. But then after that, Soucy brings his stick up, and as he brings his stick up, you can tell he's getting ready to cross-check him. In comes Nikita Zadorov from behind, cross-checks McDavid from behind, which shoves him into the stick of Soucy, but instead of Soucy probably getting him in the midsection or chest area, which was what he's aiming for, at least I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that was his intent, it ends up getting him more in the neck and face area, which is certainly not a good look. So he does get a 1-game suspension, but in my opinion, as much as I do agree with that, Zadorov was more of the culprit in that case. He's the one that caused everything. If Zadorov does not come in and get involved, I don't know that really erupts the way it does. So we'll see. Zadorov was also fined $5,000. I know Canucks fans are complaining about Zach Hyman, who did come in as after the fact to react to what happened, and he did cross-check and I believe end up cutting Zadorov. I would have been okay with Hyman. I don't know if that's suspension, but at least a fine. I think Hyman could have got something out of that. As far as McDavid goes, I don't think McDavid really did anything wrong. They exchanged a couple of light slashes, which is not unusual after the whistle at all. Far from a cross-check to the neck or face. So I'm totally okay with McDavid not getting anything out of that, but I would have been okay with Hyman getting a little something based on how he reacted and what transpired after the fact. Either way, it was a fiery affair. I expect the Oilers to react in the next game. We'll see if they target anybody on Vancouver and try to make it a little harder on their star players. I don't know what will happen. Obviously, they got guys who can certainly play that style of game, so we'll be curious to see how much more violent or physical that series ends up getting. But it's been fun to watch so far, that's for sure. Other news around the league, the Buffalo Sabres today have announced that they've promoted head coach from their AHL team in Rochester, Seth Appert, who was considered for the head coaching gig and was, I know someone wondered if he didn't get it, if he might be looking for other opportunities elsewhere, maybe leave the organization, but he has been promoted to join the big club on Lindy Ruff's staff and will be on the bench with him this year as an assistant coach. So he did put out a video, speak to the Buffalo Sabres social media team earlier, and certainly seemed quite appreciative for the opportunity. It will make a good addition there. They made some other shakeups to the coaching staff here as well. So, but he would be the most prominent name joining the team. One other update as well, injury related. New York Rangers forward Blake Wheeler has been obviously trying to slowly rehab and make his return. He's now been able to shed the non-contact jersey. The Rangers do play the Hurricanes tonight in Game 5. If I would suspect that even just the non-contact jersey just came off today, I would think he's going to need to get at least a few practices in before he'd be an option. But I would suggest that with them having a 3-1 commanding lead in the series, if they move on and beat the Hurricanes out, that getting a few extra days of rest here, that Blake Wheeler very well could maybe see action in round 3. So we'll see how that works out, but at least he's getting closer to returning, which is certainly good. We also got word today the NHL Awards will be held on Thursday, June the 27th. Of course, they will also be in Vegas, the same as the NHL Draft. So, of course, just the day before the draft goes, I believe it's the 28th, 29th, if I'm not mistaken, and it's going to be at the newly open Fontainebleau. So, so the rate in Vegas on June 27th will be when we get the NHL award ceremony. We also found out today the former first-round pick of the Ottawa Senators a number of years back, Lassi Thompson, who unfortunately has not really been able to solidify himself as a regular NHLer and spent some time on waivers this year. He got picked up by the Ducks, spent a little bit of time in their organization, went back on waivers, was reclaimed by Ottawa, and then spent the rest of the year their minor league affiliate in Belleville. Has opted to head back to Europe, and he signed a contract for a 1-year deal to play in Sweden next year. I believe it was the Malmo team, if I'm not mistaken, that signed him. So he will not be in the NHL next season. As I mentioned as well, speaking of European leagues, the KHL does have a pretty prominent UFA coming up that is trying to make a jump to the NHL, and that's Maxim Siplikov. He wants to sign in the NHL, and he's getting a fair bit of interest. There is a possibility here that he could make a decision sometime as early as this week, according to Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick on the 32 Thoughts podcast. They were mentioning a number of teams. I know the Toronto Maple Leafs were one of the teams that were interested, but at this point they believe there's still some interest, but they're not sure that they're the front runner. The Montreal Canadiens were certainly in the mix. Might have been the more likely Canadian team for him to join, but that's not really a confirmed or done deal. But Montreal, probably the Canadian team with the most interest. There was some American-based teams in the mix as well, so we're not sure exactly where he's going to end up, but certainly look for him to sign an NHL contract as early as the next week or two here, and he'll be making the jump to North America, to the NHL this coming fall, assuming he comes over and looks good in training camp, makes the team. Otherwise, I suppose it's always possible he could end up in the minors, but right now that's likely. I guess it depends on where he goes, but I would suspect he's coming over with the intention of playing at the highest level. Now, the latest on the NHL coaching front, we're going to get into the Leafs head coaching search here in just a moment, as well as some Leafs trade talk. But before we get into the Leafs business, looking at some other teams around the league, some updates around Winnipeg and New Jersey as well. Winnipeg's next likely head coach is probably going to be Scott Arniel, who's been an assistant under Rick Bowness and certainly filled in as head coach. We've mentioned that before. The latest from Elliotte Friedman believes that that's most likely the case, but Kevin Cheveldayoff, the GM, is likely still going to talk to a few other candidates just to kind of make sure they feel that way still. And in New Jersey, they've interviewed a variety of candidates, many of which have interviewed in Toronto as well. Not everybody, but a decent amount of the same people. They, of course, had reached out to the Leafs to get permission from Sheldon Keefe just in the past few days after he was let go, and they did have a conversation or interview with him. At one point, it was believed that some other frontrunners like Craig Berube and Todd McLellan were both talking to the Devils as well as the Leafs here now after Keefe was let go, and then Sheldon Keefe has been talking to the Devils, but the frontrunner right now appears to likely be former Oilers bench boss Jay Woodcroft. So right now, that's the way things are trending, according to Friedman. No guarantee on that, but that's where things are going right now. The Devils had a bit of a head start. Of course, their season was over before the Leafs, and they were not able to secure a contract for Berube or McLellan. So I don't know if that's a case of New Jersey not being sure they wanted to do that, or if the case of those guys not wanting to be sure themselves that they wanted to commit to the Devils and see what else might be on the market just yet. It's hard to say. But right now, Woodcroft seems to be the front runner in New Jersey, with Keefe being a possibility. In Toronto, Darren Dreger believes the Leafs are very likely to hire a head coach this week. Not a guarantee by any means, but feels it's quite possible. Craig Berube appears to be the leader or the front runner, if you will, in that scenario. But it sounds like they've also had a good interview with Todd McClellan over the course of the weekend too. So you can't rule him out. And really, at this rate, they didn't really talk about anybody else on the 32 Thoughts podcast really being seriously considered. I know some people think that the Leafs might be watching the Hurricanes situation just to see if there's any chance at all that Rod Brind'Amour becomes available. We know he needs a new deal to coach next season, and they've been negotiating, and at one point there was a deal on the table, then it was reportedly taken off, and they've had a hard time coming to an agreement on money and having his assistants looked after. We know GM Don Waddell is involved, but certainly more of an issue at the ownership level with Tom Dundon, and Dundon's notoriously not one who likes to spend a lot of money on those positions. It's no secret that Rod Brind'Amour has been underpaid for some time, but he loves Carolina. He's worked there and played there for a very long time, has no intention of wanting to leave, but of course, the contract status could possibly play a role in that. If they happen to lose tonight to the Rangers and they have an early second-round exit, is there any possibility that owner Tom Dundon would suggest that they go in a new direction? I mean, I'm not sure that they do, but you can't completely rule it out, and you can't blame teams like Toronto or New Jersey for maybe kind of just waiting around a couple of days, if you will, just trying to see so that he could be considered. Although, if you take a look at the other coaches that they've been talking to, Craig Berube has a Stanley Cup to his name as a coach, where Ron Brind'Amour does not. Carolina Hurricanes have been a good team. He's certainly a great motivator. He has a lot of great speeches, a very smart, articulate coach. But does he have a cup to his name? So I'm not really sure that he'd be a better option than Berube. I think there's some similarities in how they like to run their teams and how they, like to lead by example. But we'll see where things go on that front. But I don't have any doubts that the Leafs might wait a little bit just to see. So another great coach to talk to. But at the same time, I don't know that they're going to really think too much that he's going to be available. Everybody seems to be under the impression he's most likely staying. So we'll see. Berube appears to be the guy, but you just never know until they get through the full process. It's hard to say. Now, so that's where things are at on the coaching front. When it comes to the roster, we know that there's likely changes coming. We've talked a ton about Mitch Marner and different trade destinations. His name is popping up on the rumor mill left, right, and center with all kinds of different trade scenarios. We've reviewed different articles from different scoops from different insiders suggesting what might transpire in that regard, but we haven't really talked a ton, except for maybe once when the Leafs were first eliminated, about the possibility that they may also go to Captain John Tavares and ask if they can work something out for him to move on as well. Of course, John Tavares, only a couple of days after the loss, committed to Team Canada and decided to head to Prague, over to Europe and to Czechia, and to defend his country's honor here with Team Canada. So, of course, he's not even around right now, playing some decent hockey with Canada. But at the same time, what does his future hold? There's another article here from Sportsnet's and Luke Fox talking about how things could get very uncomfortable between both sides. Of course, Tavares is the hometown guy who you could say that he gave up more money to sign with his hometown team. It was believed at the time that the $11 million contract that he got from the Leafs per season wasn't the highest bidder. That the San Jose Sharks, who were a team he did have multiple meetings with as well, were offering around 13. But again, just like I said when the Leafs first signed him, just because another team was offering more money, it doesn't make this a bargain. He's been a good player for them, but has he been an $11 million player for them? No. And I think if they had a Stanley Cup championship hanging in the arena like a banner, or the fact that they've been to the finals or more success in the playoffs, I think this would be a little easier for them to handle right now, of course, but they were prepared for his production to probably drop off towards the end of the contract and whatnot, but I don't know that they've been prepared for the total lack of playoff success during the entire tenure of his contract. So this article from Luke Fox on Sportsnet basically says how things could get very uncomfortable coming up here between Tavares and the Leafs, talking about the possibility of could they even strip the captaincy and put it on Matthews, which could be just their way of sending a signal that they'd like to move on and go in a new direction. Of course, he's a very proud player. Certainly works very hard. There's no doubt about that. Of course, trying to compete against Father Time so that hopefully his skill set doesn't slow down too much here in the final years of his playing days, trying to chase a Stanley Cup. But, between Marner and Tavares, they've got, well over $20 million tied up going into next year, both with 1 year left on their contracts. Like I said, this article outlines the possibility of them having a tough conversation with Tavares about moving on. Essentially, the teams that they listed that would be more likely to take this contract are all teams that are not likely going to be playoff teams, or at least not guaranteed by any means, and would be a tough sell. So you're looking at teams that are rebuilding, Anaheim, San Jose, Chicago. I think you mentioned maybe Buffalo was in there. There's not a ton of trades with contending teams where he could go and still have a chance to be in a more competitive situation. So, is he going to really be willing to waive? I don't know. I guess essentially the way some of these insiders are positioning things and some of these reporters are saying that if Marner and Tavares get the feeling like, hey, we're not wanted here, they really want us out, that they'll find a way to agree to waive as long as they can get something that they like and where they can head to. But at the end of the day, it leaves a big hole. It's a tough trade to win on both fronts. In the case of John Tavares, it would leave them thin down the middle. Personally, I think that's something that they need to address this summer anyways, is probably another decent center after Matthews. I would, at this point, if Tavares does stay, I'd opt to find another center and put him maybe on the wing. Certainly, just because he plays on the wing, it doesn't mean he can't take a ton of faceoffs, which he is good at. Look at Claude Giroux in Ottawa, one of the best faceoff guys in the league, and he plays wing. He doesn't play center. So, just because you don't play center doesn't mean you can't be heavily involved in the faceoffs. Obviously his foot speed has certainly slowed down a bit compared to his younger days. Not a huge surprise, and it's not easy anymore. So certainly, a player who can still be productive, and if he did want to stay with the Leafs beyond this contract, would have to take a fairly big pay cut. But what is he going to want for a pay cut? Is he going to want $5 million, $6 million, $7 million? What does he see as fair amongst, sticking around afterwards? Certainly going to take less, but how much less would Tavares take? That's the big question that we don't know. So, like I said, this article from Luke Fox suggests that the Leafs and Tavares' camp are going to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations to determine the future for both sides. At the end of the day, he may refuse to waive, and it may not really be anything that goes anywhere, but you have to think it's a real possibility. If they can move, moving Marner won't be that difficult, I don't think, and it's believed by NHL reporters that he would be more willing to accept that fate and give him some teams to work with, whereas on the Tavares side, it's a little bit less clear how he would feel about it, given the fact that Mitch is still young. Yes, he just recently got married, but, doesn't have kids yet. Or Tavares has a young family, a wife that's also very involved in the community too. Leaving would be a challenge and a bigger disruption of family for them than it would be for Marner. So not to say that the Leafs have to factor that into consideration, of course, but at the same time, it's tricky to do. It's not the easiest thing to work out. He doesn't have to go anywhere if he doesn't want to, but the article also addresses the fact that they would leave a hole at center ice. My rebuttal to that would be yes, but they also would take a huge load off the salary cap, where the Leafs could afford to make other trades or signings to bring other depth players in, that they might be an overall deeper team with the players that they can add into their lineup because they can now afford to do so. If they had $20 million go out the door, and even if they have, say, another 8 to 10 coming back in contracts in those trades, it could still get you a couple more players there and still maybe have another $10 million or something available in space to go spend on other players. So there's certainly makes a ton of sense to me why they would at least have that conversation. He will have all the say in the world if he stays or goes, but there is belief, according to Luke Fox and others, that they're going to have those uncomfortable conversations. And even if he does stay, is there a possibility that they change the captaincy and hand it over to Matthews? Wouldn't be shocking either. So let me know your thoughts. Is Marner the only one of the core four that's likely to go, or could we see a Tavares trade as well? Another thing to keep in mind, especially for cash-conscious teams, yes, he has a huge cap hit of $11 million, but the bulk of his money this year is paid in a signing bonus, which will be done July 1st. After that, he's only due a salary of $910,000. So it would be a case for a team to have a high cap hit player who can still be somewhat, important and offensively impactful. Maybe not the way he used to be, but still relatively impactful for only $900K. I mean, for other teams, that cap hit may not be the issue like it is for the Leafs. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. Is John Tavares likely going to waive, or is he more likely to stay and Marner to go? Who would you try to, go after with the money you're going to save, assuming Tavares is traded for, let's say you don't take much back for a roster player. Are you able to make the team better with the space you can get from him and what you might get as a return? Let me know some thoughts around where he could go and what things could look like down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.